I'd like to welcome everybody here to the College of Law and the fourth webinar in the Careers Academy series that is running this week. This is the second day of a jam-packed program filled with webinars aimed to help you as law students, graduates, and young lawyers kickstart your careers as you transition into the legal profession. In today's webinar, which is taking control of your career narratives to land a role, we'll be discussing a topic that's very close to my heart, career storytelling. We'll be focusing on how storytelling can help you win interviews, win jobs, and win in your career. I'm Ruth Beran, the National Careers Advisor at the College of Law, and I'm really delighted to be online with you today. Before we go any further though, I'd like to say that as we gather for this webinar, we recognise that many of us are on different lands of different traditional custodians. I would like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands we are all present on today and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are on this webinar. I pay my respects to each of their elders past, present and emerging. Today, I'm joined by four wonderful panellists. Natalie Mascarenas, Senior Consultant Graduate Resourcing at Baker McKenzie. Zara Gardner, Talent Acquisition Business Partner at Shine Lawyers. You're nodding your head, but you're welcome to wave your hands as well. So that's Zara. Natalie, you can wave as well. Barb Doquil, Manager Assessment at Working with Children Check Victoria. And Donna Ross, a Recruitment Director in ATO People at the Australian Taxation Office. Before I pass over to our panel, I wanted to let you know that we've allocated 15 minutes of questions at the end of this session. You can enter questions through the Q&A function. We record all of our webinars and we will share the recording of this session via email in the next week or so. We'd also appreciate if you would take the time at the end to complete a quick survey on the session, and that can give you the opportunity to fill in any ideas you may have for other webinars. I'll pass over to my panellists to introduce themselves using their own career narrative with the question that often gets asked first in interviews. So first up, Natalie, it's up to you. Can you tell me about yourself?
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you to everyone for attending today. Just a quick note, my voice is a little bit hoarse at the moment. I've been doing lots of presenting, so you may need to bear with me. But for me, I actually studied law and science with a major in psychology, but wanted to pursue law. I practiced as a lawyer for 7 years as a commercial litigator, and then decided that I wanted to have a career change and looked at the things that I was really particularly enjoying in my legal career, and they tended to be around people, mentoring, development, brand, and helping people develop. And that led me into a career in HR. So I have been in the HR world for about 10 years, and really my role primarily is to look after the graduates and the seasonal clerks, both the recruitment processes and their development programs at Baker McKenzie. And I also have some other roles in the firm. So I've done some project work in relation to early careers projects, global projects. Baker McKenzie is a global law firm, and I play a lead role on a Baker Wellbeing Committee. So that's the psychology side of me coming through, and particularly in the legal industry, wellbeing has always been something I'm quite passionate about. So a bit of a snapshot on me. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm going to pass over now to Barb with the same question. So tell me about yourself, Barb.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks very much for having me today on the panel. I'm currently a Manager of Assessment at Working with Children Check Victoria, a unit within the Department of Justice. I've been with the Department of Justice and Community Safety for approximately 17 years. And during that time, I've actually held quite a few positions for the last 6 or 7 years in management. But prior to that, I was a Senior Inspector for Consumer Affairs Victoria. So I've been able to accumulate quite a number of skills that have been transferable throughout my career, and as you know, got me to where I am today, basically. I've got a lot of experience in recruitment, and I've written many recruitment or interview questions. And I've also sat on many panels during my time with Department of Justice. In my space, in my home space, I'm consumed by family, horses and travel. And today I look really forward to being able to, be in this session and believe that I'll be able to give you some really vital tools to be able to go out there and nail your next interview.
Thanks, Barb. I'm sure it's not just a belief. I know you can actually give these insights to the people on this webinar. Now I'm going to go to Donna. Donna, just a bit of information for the people watching this webinar. Donna's actually coming to us from hospital where a family member is. So please bear with the fact that she's on her phone at the moment. And I think this is a good indication that as anyone applying for jobs, whether it's lawyers or anyone else, you have to be adaptable. So thanks, Donna, for being with us today.
Thanks, Ruth. I'd like to start by saying I think my career is an example of a spectacular accident in terms of my experience is really diverse and varied. So I started my career as a tabloid journalist and in television current affairs. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I also spent many years working internationally in mergers and acquisition, currency trading and institutional investment before returning to Australia and taking up a HR role at the Australian Taxation Office. And during my public sector career, I've had the absolute fortune of working across a wide spectrum of HR and the employee life cycle, ranging from recruitment to payroll, project management, security vetting, and a variety of generalist and specialist HR roles. At the moment, I'm working on a whole of government major IT, HR platform implementation, which is a terrific and invigorating challenge, but something I'm passionate about throughout my whole career, and particularly at the moment, is working with candidates about how you can develop your candidate platform to demonstrate that you are a low risk and high return candidate to develop your own employee value proposition. Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, Donna. And I share your background of being originally a journalist. So I'm glad to find someone who's also in this industry who has that background. And I'm sure we'll learn about your storytelling throughout this webinar. Zara, lucky last, please tell us about yourself.
Lucky last indeed. Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us through today. It's a jam-packed week, it sounds, with the College of Law, so I'm very appreciative of your attendance with us today. A little bit about me. So I had graduated university with a communications degree and majors in organisational communications. I had thought I really wanted to go into HR because I really wanted to help people. And in my graduate recruitment experience, I actually really enjoyed getting to know the recruiters on the other end of my first experience with them. So I actually chose to follow a specialisation within recruitment, and here I am 7 years later, having completed a few different roles within my career. So have always been within white collar corporate recruitment and had worked at a global recruitment agency before specialising at UNU Recruitment Partners, and had started up their legal support practice, which is recruiting legal secretaries and law clerks for all different law firms across Australia, Baker McKenzie being one of those wonderful firms, Shine Lawyers being also one of those wonderful firms. And I've been here now for 3 years and have never looked back in helping people. And I think the reason why I love my job and why it's so important to me to be in my role is that I have always wanted to go into HR or recruitment to help people in their career journey. And Shine Lawyers, being one of Australia's leading plaintiff law firms, is a law firm which actually helps people get their life back on track through something which has happened to them through no fault of their own. So to be able to really work for a purpose-led organisation, and for me to help those people in helping our clients in changing laws and making a society a better place, it's a pretty special thing of what I get to do every day. And I look forward to sharing how I can really help you frame your career story and your what I like to call elevator pitch through today.
Great. Thank you, Zara. So that was career storytelling from 4 different people, but what is it? What exactly is career storytelling? Is it important for pitching yourself? And how's it used in job applications, interviews, and developing your brand? I'm going to jump back to you, Zara, and ask that one first, but I think this is one that all of the panelists can let us know what they think about that question.
Absolutely. And I think it is a very important quality to possess in every job application, because amongst any role these days, you could be competing with, say, 20 to 30 applicants at least. So what is really important is when you're gearing up for a phone interview with that recruiter, just like I had, it's important to have a 30-second pitch to really tell them about you and tell exactly what you want them to know about you in going for that particular role, because people do remember stories. And people also respect that communication is two-way. So I need to know the very facts about your application in a succinct way, so that I can judge whether you're the right fit for our organisation, as well as you're the right fit for this particular role. But open to this discussion. Let's pass it around. Nat, what do you think?
Yeah, and look, I might go, I'm jumping ahead, Ruth, but might even talk about the difference between written career storytelling and oral career storytelling, just maybe go on that tangent. But obviously both are very important to the recruitment process, and you will have to display both throughout your recruitment processes. So obviously with written storytelling, you've got time to prepare, you've got time to think about, what does the reader want to hear? What are they trying to get out of this question? So many recruiters or many firms or organisations will ask you questions as part of the application process. They could be behavioural questions, they could be a question about an achievement, which is what we have. But those questions are designed to get to know you and get to know, what you're about, your key skills, experiences, etc. So have a think about what the reader wants to hear. And the benefit with written storytelling is you've got time to prepare for it. You've got time to craft the story. You can use elements like the STAR technique, which we'll talk about later in this session as well. I suppose with oral storytelling, this is a lot more spontaneous and tends to come about in interviews or at networking events. So less time to prepare, but the chance to really connect with someone, which is a really big part of storytelling. You have the chance to see an audience reaction and sort of gauge how they're reacting to your story and adjust it accordingly. You can use things like eye contact and gestures and body language, and even emphasize words to really make a point. So you have a bit more flexibility and I suppose impact with that oral storytelling. There's a really interesting TED Talk, which I will share with Ruth, and you might want to share it with the attendees today. But the presenter talks about the impacts of dopamine and oxytocin on storytelling and how that impacts people listening to you as well. So we'll make sure that we share that today. But the kind of things, when you're telling a story, with the brain will release dopamine in response to an emotionally charged event. The resolution of conflict, the recognition of a pattern, which creates a pleasurable response for someone. So being really conscious of that as you're telling your story. It also can release oxytocin, which is often in response to, to increase empathy and a connection, as well as compassion and trust. So it's a fabulous TED Talk. I'll make sure I share it with Ruth, to share with the group today, but being very conscious of those two elements as you apply for clerkships or grad roles or early careers roles, and also as you undertake interviews for those as well.
Thanks, Natalie. Donna, I think you're about to jump in there.
Oh, thank you. That's probably the signal when you can no longer see me. That's exactly right. That can be our cue. What I would also like to add, and particularly when you're talking about your oral elevator pitch, as Zara mentioned, or what I call your employer value proposition, is I would really encourage you to think of two things. One is, what is it about your job, or what is it about what you do that you absolutely love, or what you think you're really good at? Because I think that is at the absolute genesis of what might be one of your standard pitches that you can apply very broadly. The other thing that I would also suggest is, if a pitch is in reference to a particular opportunity, I'd really encourage you to invest some time in understanding the organisation that you're going to apply this to, because that's really, really powerful. It sends a very, very clear signal, not only that you've done a little bit of research and things like that, but you're looking for opportunities to apply your skills and experience, or what you're passionate about, to the organisation that you're applying to, and what its goals, what its objectives, what its particular priorities might be. When you're able to do that, I find, in my experience, and at the ATO, we recruit for thousands and thousands of opportunities. That is a really high value add, tailored opportunity that I think often goes a little bit underutilised.
Thanks, Donna. I think as well, that idea of knowing yourself too before you can tell your own career story makes a big difference too. Barb, did you have any comments to make?
Well, I think the ladies have really covered it, but I think, from my point of view, it's really important that you understand, basically what job you're going for, and really know who's going to be interviewing you, and really align your answers to the KC, and also make sure that when you're putting in your pitch, whether it's written or verbal, that everybody's got strengths, but blend your strengths into what can make you stand out, get an interview, and then when you're into the interview, you get the job. So there's a lot of people that might actually write down what their strengths are, but they don't align it to the position that they're going for. So it's really, really important that when you're writing your application letter, or you're writing your key selection criteria answers to those questions, that you're making it for that particular audience, and not just I'm a lawyer and I've done this. You really need to align it to the position that you're actually going for, and that's sometimes just in wording, just buzzwords that people will pick up on, and it's certainly something that I'll look for when I'm reading an application. And when you're actually in front of the audience, you really want to align your storytelling about yourself to what you can do for them, how good you're going to be for them. And that way you're bringing something to the table. And I think it's really important, if we feel that we're going to get a benefit out of hiring you, you're going to be the top candidate.
Yes, thanks, Barb. And I think the only way to do that is to research the organisation that you're applying to, research it in terms of the goals, the objectives, the priorities, and you can find that out by potentially speaking to other people, or even looking on websites to look at annual reports, or what's happening in the news for that organisation, definitely. Natalie, we've got everybody to answer this question. with the question at the beginning, tell me about yourself, but how would you recommend answering that question? Do you need to know who you are before you can answer it?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Ruth, and it is something that I often find students get stumped on when we do mock interviews. They will say, "Oh, I wasn't prepared for that." And when you think about it, it's such a simple question. You know who you are, so you should be able to answer it. But I think what stumps people is what to put in that answer, how much information, how much is too much, how much is too little, and it's, I suppose, it's a general guide. Have a reflect on what do you think your audience or your interviewers are wanting to get out of it. And often it's like a question to ease you into the interview. As stressful as it may be for many people, they want to get to know you. It's quite easy, to talk about yourself, and they're doing that often to get a sense of you that will lead on to a follow-up question as well. So my general guide is just a couple of minutes, say about 3-ish minutes as a general guide. You may want to provide some highlights, some of the highlights of your CV. And if I had to sort of give guidance on it, have a think about what you're currently doing. So, what are you currently studying? Of course, they have your CV, but, it provides a nice snapshot. Where are you currently working, or what are some of the key jobs you've had quite recently? And you may want to highlight a couple of personal things too. So perhaps a couple of extracurriculars, perhaps a couple of hobbies and interests. And if some of those can have a bit of a legal, a bit of a legal flavour, I think that also goes well for you. As all of my colleagues have said today, think about the job you're applying for and some of the skills you can bring. So if you drop that you participated in a mooting competition, the next question might be about a moot, or it might be about, if you've done some work at a community legal centre, that may lead on to the next follow-up question. But I will say it's really important to think about this question, prepare for the question. It's the start of the interview, right? So you want to come across as keen, engaged, prepared. You're also setting the scene and the tone of the interview, and you're creating that first impression. So I would say really important to think about how you'd answer that question. The other thing I will say, you don't want to come across rehearsed. So I would sort of suggest, so you don't come across rehearsed, maybe intersperse some different things in your answer each time, just because you don't want to have it rattle off an answer and have it sort of as a rehearsed sort of response. So they're probably my key tips on, tell me about yourself.
Thanks, Natalie. And given that all of our panelists have just answered that question, do any of you have any comments on answering that to the best of your ability, following on from your introductions today?
Ruth, it's Donna. I just might jump in and just reinforce something that I think is really valuable in this space. And again, it just goes back to being really reflective about maybe what you're good at and what you love and what you're passionate about. I don't underestimate if people have got, some really extracurricular activities, to think about how you can tailor and you can include those. So, for instance, people who are passionate about sport and participate in, team events, or who volunteer or do all those types of things. I'm really interested in that for a couple of reasons, regardless of, whether it's directly related to the role that you're applying for. But for me and for us at the ATO, we look at those things as demonstrations of leadership, being able to work as a member of a team. It's about discretionary effort. It's giving back to the community. So I think those things are really valuable, and it's just a matter of having a little bit of a think about, how you can incorporate that and make it align in a professional setting.
Definitely. Thank you, Donna. On that note, I am actually going to put Barb on the spot, because you talked about the fact that you have horses, or that you spend time with them. And that to me was very memorable. Why did you decide to include that in your sort of pitch there at the beginning, the tell me about yourself question?
Just for some context, it's the first question we always ask. And I actually think it makes you a person. So, you know, I'm going to tell you about my strengths and what I can bring to the table, but I'm also going to say to you, and this is what I do outside of work, because it makes me relatable, and you have to be relatable when you're in an interview. You know, if you're very rigid and rehearsed, it sometimes can come across very, very cold, and we want to see a real person in front of us when we're, you know, conducting these interviews. And you never know, you might say something that will trigger, like I have with Ruth, and they'll go, oh, I remember that person. They spoke about, you know, she had horses. I've got horses. So it's again, it's a relatable type of answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Mum.
And can I just say, Donna, I was laughing to myself, and this is really off topic, but I have to tell you, my son has just gone for a position just at the cinema. And walked in, and we had rehearsed all these questions, you know, if they asked this, and the first question they asked him is, do you have a sport that you play? And
Love that.
he was taken aback, because he was like, what are they asking me this for? And I laughed to myself, and I said, they're asking you that because it's weekend work and they want to know that you're going to be available. So, you know, it's just really interesting, the questions that you might get asked. So it's, you know, remember that one.
I love that. I think the only thing which I'd add, if it's okay, and echoing all sentiments here, you know, not appearing too rehearsed, being relatable. The thing which I absolutely love when I interview a candidate is if they reflect on their answer and they actually say, did I answer your question? Because then it can actually provide a space for the listener to either redirect them into a way that they feel appropriate in, or maybe they want to delve in a little bit further on, say, a moot, or they want to talk a little bit more about the weekend work that you're doing. And it provides that opportunity for the listener to know that you're a humble person and you're open to feedback and you really want to get across what you need to say. So it's one of my particular favorites, and I have a person who we just hired who that will be the highlight in my mind of that person, that it was such a memorable phone interview for me, that they were just so humble and kind to make sure that they really knew that I got what I needed from them.
Sarah, can I jump in and ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I think, and knowing that some students can take things quite literally, what is your guidance on asking that follow-up question? Because if you're asking that after every question that's asked, you come across as someone who's not confident and maybe a bit insecure. So what guidance would you give to students?
Totally. So I think if you feel as though that you're really rambling in that answer, I think it's perfectly fine to ask, have I answered your question? I think a great technical way to help you not ask that every single time is to actually repeat the question at the beginning of your answer, to say, you know, we often ask, what attracted you to a plaintiff law firm like Shine Lawyers? And I expect that the candidate on the other end of the line will say, okay, a plaintiff law firm like Shine, or plaintiff really sticks out to me because X, Y, Z. Did I answer your question effectively? And I can then delve into some of those parts as well. But I think helping yourself align your answer with the question which is asked is a really helpful tip to make sure you are on track and not getting too away with the fairies, which I often do too.
And I think, you know, so you're not saying literally every time, did I answer your question? Did I answer your question? Think about, you know, not doing it for every question, but even offering, you know, I'm happy to expand on anything I've shared, but again, not for every question. You want to project confidence and, you know, credibility as well. So I just thought, yeah, it would be good to raise that too.
Great question for sure.
Thank you, Natalie and Sarah. Sorry.
Might also add, I think I've figured out how to get video and sound, so I'm very clever. And that just is recognising that everybody is always a bit nervous in interviews, let alone people that might really suffer from nerves. So what I find and what I do and what I really love when candidates do this to me is you get asked a question, if you sort of feel yourself immediately going down a rabbit hole, and it happens to the best of us, feel really confident that you can say to the panel, thank you for your question. I'm just going to have a think about that for a second and then I'll answer. Or, you know, you might just say, now, can you repeat that again, or what have you? But I really value that, because for me, that's a candidate taking control and saying to me, thank you for the question, Donna. I'm just going to have a think for a minute and then I'll answer. That's how I'm going to run this show, because this is a partnership. It's between us asking questions and wanting to get the best out of you as a candidate. So don't feel afraid about doing that, because I think it's a great show of proactive control, and it gives you that millisecond just to think, don't panic. Right, now I'm going to talk about this.
Love it.
Fantastic. Zara, I'm going to ask you a question then, which relates, I think, to interviews, but also for written applications. Should candidates know their audience, and how do you tailor your career story for each role or employer?
Absolutely. So yes is the short answer to the long-winded one I'm about to say. With written applications and, of course, with verbal applications like a phone interview, of course, you need to tailor the application to the audience in which you're applying for. So that means individual cover letters and individual selection criteria answers for the role that you are applying for. And that involves researching the company of where you are applying, making sure that not just rehearsing the values in a phone interview or stating them in a cover letter, but really telling the reader why you connect with those values in particular. There's so many instances where students often ask, well, I'd love to go into criminal law, or I'd love to go into mergers and acquisitions, and often I have to say, look, I'm really sorry, but we don't practice in those areas because we're a plaintiff law firm and we act for an individual. So really knowing your audience is so important, so that your first impression is perfect, and as best as you can to have a phone interview, or at least get a phone interview via that cover letter.
Thanks, Zara. Anyone else got some insights into this? And I also would say that personally, my way of describing this is, imagine that the employer that you're applying to is singing their own song. What they want is someone to come along and sing in harmony. And what that actually involves is doing some research and finding keywords, as you said, some of their values and mission, to be able to sing along in harmony. But anyone got comments on that?
I definitely echo.
Sorry, you go.
I definitely echo what Zara's saying, and I constantly tell students to research and tailor applications and your interviews, but you also want to bring it back to you. We don't want people to just regurgitate whatever's on our firm website or Grad Australia site. That's not what we want, but we want people who are excited about working with us and excited with working with a global law firm and the hands-on experience we offer. So very important to, just taking Zara's point further, bring it back to you. So what can a global law firm offer you? Why are you interested in hands-on work? Like, what sort of person, what sort of work do you do, and how will you sort of go in that environment? So I think it's really so important to research. I can't stress that enough, but really important to show what the firm has to offer. It's going to benefit your career, and what you have to offer will benefit the firm as well. But tailor that, and I use the word link. Make sure you are linking back to the firm and linking back to yourself. So give it meaning, and don't just show that you've done all this beautiful research and regurgitate that. So just a point.
Thanks.
I think just going on from what Zara and Natalie have said, and not wanting to put words in Barb's mouth, but for both of us from a public sector experience, the thing for me, I think, is a real delineator and a real differentiation for candidates here is when you're able to be authentic. So you've researched, but then applying your own skills and experience, your own values and things like that. And so not only why you think you can make a valuable contribution, but, you know, why it's important to you. I just think when candidates can do that, it's a really, really powerful message that makes you stand out.
Barb, did you have any comments on that as well?
Yeah, for me, I think when you're looking at the KSC, the answer to the question is always in the KSC. So it's really, again, it's about aligning your answers and telling your story, but making sure you're taking enough from the question and placing it in your answer so that you're aligning again with the organisation and what they're seeking. You know, there's many a time that I've been in a panel and been on a panel and somebody's come in, they've had a fantastic written application, and when they get in front of me, they can't back it up in person. They haven't done any research. They haven't been able to answer the KSC. So it's, you know, it's really important to make sure that when you're writing your application, when you're sitting in an interview, that you can back everything up and that you do come across really, really authentic, but that you've taken the time to actually know a little bit about the organisation and that you've aligned your questions, whether it be written or verbal, to the organisation that you're sitting in, you know, sitting in front of their delegates, trying to get a job with them. It is important to know that.
Definitely. And KSC is key selection criteria.
I'm sorry, key selection criteria. And I must say, and I've actually written this down, that a lot of the time when you're in a verbal interview, phone interview, don't use acronyms because you can't assume that the person that's interviewing you understands what you're talking about if you're using acronyms. So it is really important, you know, to not use them.
Yeah, which can be a little bit hard too, though, if you're trying to be authentic, because you know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So any tips then on how to pitch your answer, I guess, to the audience too? Maybe Zara.
Yeah, well, I'd say key selection criteria, it's something which we don't have per se at Shine, but I would say that what you are saying in the application of the key selection criteria, as Barb was saying, you need to bring that authenticity out from the application and bring that to an interview. Otherwise, they're just words on a piece of paper that you wrote 3 weeks ago and you've forgotten all about them, and you've in, you know, deer in a headlight situation in an interview. So I think bringing that authenticity to your answers in a written cover letter and also in an interview is really important. I'm going to be my own best student and say, did I answer your question? Because I don't think I did.
I do think you did. And
Cool.
It's the idea of being authentic.
Yeah,
I think
cool.
that's actually quite tricky, I think, to get right in an interview situation, because you do want to answer the questions, you're pitching yourself, but you're also trying to be your own person at the same time. So that was part of the question, but I'm going to leap into another one, which is related, I think, about elevator pitches or value propositions or even barbecue starters, if you want to think about it like that. How do you present one? And I guess just an add-on, how do you present one authentically? And I'll leave that open to the panel. Anyone can jump in.
Maybe I might start off with a very quick story, and I'll make this really quick. I was working with a candidate at the ATO when we were advertising for Black economy roles. So this is when people are running cash in hand businesses and things like that. And this particular candidate had just amazing experience 20 years ago. So it wasn't current experience, but we still maximised it in his resume. He used to be a freelance opal miner in Kalgoorlie, which was a perfect example of a black economy type of role. Anyway, we were just talking one day in preparation for his interview, and just a little bit of backstory for this candidate. They have currently, since this conversation, been interviewed twice, and they're now acting in another high level role. But he was just saying to me, oh, look, you know, when I was a kid, you know, I'd be working at my grandfather's market garden. So he was second or third generation Italian. And he would say, oh, Nona would say, Paul, you know, never pay tax, never write anything down. You never tell the government anything. You know, you always barter. And he said, even then, you know, I knew that wasn't right. And I said, no, but if everybody did that, there wouldn't be a school to go to or a road to drive on. And I'm listening to him. And I said, Paul, that is your employer value proposition, whatever way you care to tell it. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it could be something like at the end of the interview, which is when he used it. He said, I'd just like to finish and say thank you for the opportunity to be interviewed. But, you know, subconsciously, I've been preparing for these black economy roles since when I was a little kid, working with my grandfather on his market garden, where he used to rail against the government and not paying tax and not writing anything down, keeping no records, always bartering. And even then, I knew that wasn't right. So I'm really confident of my skills and experience in my previous work experience that I have got the ability to work with this population because I understand how they do business, and I'm really confident I can bring them back into the system and I can future-proof their compliance. It was a zinger, and I think that's a really good example of how personalised and tailored and authentic it can be if it's done properly. But again, it really needs to be about you and tailored to the role.
Definitely a very authentic story that we're all going to remember, I think, when we get off this webinar. Thank you, Donna. Anyone else want to jump in to talk about the elevator pitches? We have spoken a little bit about this previously. So if not, I do want to just touch briefly on the STAR technique as well. So does anyone want to jump in to let me know how the STAR technique can be used for answering behavioural questions? How does that structure work in interviews? Donna, I think you had some ideas on this.
And then I'll shut up. In terms of STAR's just a framework, but what it's there to do is to help you tell a logical and constructed story, either in a written example, but I think even more importantly when preparing for interview. So in terms of STAR, it's situation, task, action and result. What I would really encourage people to consider is when you're thinking about the situation and the task, you need to be wrapping that up and explaining that very concisely, either in writing or orally in a couple of sentences, so you can concentrate on the action and the result. That is the important part. So the action is what it actually is that you did, and obviously the result is the outcome. I think what really also partners nicely with STAR is what, how and why. So the what often it fits in really nicely with what the situation and the task is, but in order for either your example in application or your examples that you want to talk to in interview, to make sure they don't become too process driven and you sound like a little bit of a laundry list of I did this, I did this, I did this in terms of my actions, just thinking about how you did it. And that brings all the soft skills in terms of, well, how I negotiated, how I identified an issue, how I escalated, how I influenced, how I process improved, how I problem solved, how I had a difficult conversation, how I innovated, things like that. And then finally, with the results, always thinking about the why. Why am I talking to you about this? Why is it important? Because that why will always give you a link back to strategy, which really really ties up an example and an outcome by being able to do that.
And I think if I can add something, this is the opportunity where you can really take someone on a journey and on a story, and share your personality as well. So what was your role? Did you have to lead? Like, was there no leader and you took the lead? Did you have to bring people together, and is that showing teamwork? So without just listing, as Donna said, an entire laundry list, I showed leadership, teamwork, communication, interpersonal skills, problem solving skills. Intertwine those sort of things within your answer to showcase your skills as well, and also bring yourself to the role. So it was really challenging and I really struggled with it, but these are the steps I took as someone who's very organized, blah blah blah. And also the big point I want to make is, don't forget the result. Like, whenever we have asked these questions, typically students forget the result. They say, and this is the action I took, and that's it. But what was the result? What did you learn? How did you develop? What was the feedback? What did you, what was the result? And I think that's really important. Often students forget that, and bringing themselves to these sort of questions as well. Your passion, your enthusiasm, and your skills and experiences. So just wanted to give you a bit of a reminder on that too.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and also Donna for talking to us about the STAR technique, which can be one of the most important sort of structures, I guess, or frameworks to hang behavioural questions off, ones where they ask you for an example of something. We do have quite a number of questions in the chat. Some of these I think we've touched on a little bit. I'm coming at it here from a storytelling perspective. And I guess one of the questions here is, what are the kinds of questions we need to prepare for in interviews? And I think we've kind of covered that a little bit, but maybe Barb, do you want to jump in and touch on the kinds of questions that people need to prepare for interviews?
Yeah, sure. As I said earlier, it all sort of flows back to the job itself. So the selection criteria normally, and I can only speak on the behalf of like what I've been through with the Department of Justice, but normally we would ask 5 questions. We would ask 2 icebreaker questions. The first question being, tell me about yourself. The second being, what strengths do you bring to to this organisation if you were successful? And then we actually align our questions to the key selection criteria. So when you're writing your application, if there is a key selection criteria and they're asking you to answer within the application potentially 2 of the key selection criteria, and there might be 7, you will be asked of the other 5 in the interview, and they'll be they'll ask something around problem solving, leadership, being able to collaborate with other stakeholders. They'll ask you about, like problem solving, or even putting something together, something that you've innovated. But it will always go back to that key selection criteria. With the Department of Justice, we used to actually ask the candidates to answer 2 questions or 3 questions prior to getting an interview. They don't do that anymore. It's simply an application letter. And then if it's good enough, you'll get an interview. And that's why it's really, really important that even though you're not answering selection criteria within an application letter, that you even write your application letter about the key selection criteria. I've got great leadership skills and this is why. I've been a manager for a year, and this is what I did. This is how good I was as a manager. You know, I problem solved in this area. So when we're reading it, we're like, they're hitting those key notes that we need in order for you to be able to get an interview with us. And then once you're in the interview, you just elaborate on that. And if I can touch on what Donna and Natalie and Zara were saying about, you know, being authentic. When you're talking and you're using that STAR process, that's probably when you're the most authentic, because you're actually remembering something. So you're actually not on autopilot or in that robot mode. You're actually thinking about those steps that you've done. And when you come across like that, you really engage the audience. And that's what we're wanting. We're really wanting to be engaged. I hope I've answered your question. Thanks, Zara. But,
10 out of 10. Barb, 10 out of 10. I totally agree.
If I can just throw in a very quick tip that one of my grads shared, put an Excel spreadsheet together with a bank of questions. So Google top behavioural questions, have a reflect on the key skills and qualities that law firms or government or specific organisations are looking for. So what makes a good, you know, lawyer or graduate, and prepare examples of those. And if you have that question bank with you and have someone asking you those questions and practicing, that will really sort of help set you up for success during your interview. And also ensuring that you don't sound rehearsed, like have someone, don't script them, but have some bullet points under each of those and have people practice asking those questions for you. So in terms of interview prep, that's something that you can do as well.
And I'd have at least two examples, and it's okay to use an example that you've used when you've actually applied for the job, because let's face it, we're not going to remember every single application. So, you know, if you get stuck and you think, oh, I used that example for, you know, question 2 beforehand, use the one that you used when you actually applied for the position.
And I think with that, Barb, the opportunity is, you know, majority of applications have got fairly strict word limits, so you don't have the opportunity to submit 10 pages. So if you feel you want to or need to do that, invariably there are going to be additional angles or information around that example that you haven't had the availability to include in your application that you're absolutely going to be able to leverage off. And the other thing that I would just say I think is really important when applying to either a selection criteria or an ideal candidate, when you're picking out what those themes are, which is, as Natalie was saying, you know, you're absolutely able to build a stable of transferable examples around those themes, but it's absolutely validating. We don't want to see people writing an application and thinking, oh, okay, you know, communication, networking, innovation, and client relationship management skills. Those are obviously the themes in the ideal candidate. And they're talking about those, but in a litany of motherhood statements. I mean, you've got to be able to validate with some type of example or something that fleshes out your claim, because that's what's going to get you shortlisted. Not just saying, oh, well, I'm a great communicator, networker and innovator. There needs to be some validation.
I'm going to jump in here quickly because I'm very conscious of time. We're running out of time to answer these questions, but it actually relates to what you were just saying, Donna, about the fact that writing can eat up words, you know, that you'll end up with not enough, room, I guess, in your application letter. So what advice do you have about that, being able to tell your story, but not writing too much?
Look, I've got to be honest and say I do a lot of individual work with candidates, and Ruth, you might identify with this as a background is in journalism as well. I am a brutal and unapologetic editor. I work with lots of candidates and they use so many words. So if you've only got 750 words or 500 words or what have you, you know, you really need to exercise discipline and get away from all the extraneous stuff that, you know, you might put in there. That is a little bit of a skill. It doesn't necessarily come naturally to everybody, but you really do have to exercise discipline and minimise the unnecessary words you might do to describe something.
Definitely.
And if you're not sure, sorry, Nat, I was just going to say, if you're not sure, or if you, like me, often what I like to call word salad things, get a friend to look over it, get a mentor to look over it. There's so many, and get them to give you some guidance, but don't have them edit it themselves. It's got to be in your own words, but it needs to be concise and it needs to cut like a knife when that reader is reading that answer.
And agreeing with the person's point, you should stick to one page for a cover letter, but you may want to use other questions, like if there are additional questions, to do that storytelling element. So don't feel you need to do a lot of storytelling in your cover letter. You've got limited, as Donna said, limited space. So, you know, make sure that you address the key points that you need to address in the cover letter, any key selection criteria, etc.
We've also got a bit of a slightly left field question from the person themselves. They've said that they're a middle-aged professional woman. One of their limitations of their extracurricular, but perhaps their most rewarding, is the fact that they've brought up intelligent, compassionate daughters with strong values and work ethics. But this is very personal. Does it cross the line by telling that part of their story?
I don't think it does. I think you just need to be clever how you do it. I mean, all employers have an absolute commitment, or good employers have an absolute commitment, to diversity. And, one of in the APS, Australian Public Service, one of the 5 diversity groups is the employment of women, not just into organisations, but into senior leadership positions and roles. So, I definitely think those types of intensely personal stories have got a place. It's just that you need to be thinking about the operating environment that you're applying into and how you fashion and how you use that. I'd be interested in what the other panel members think.
I would say it's such a beautiful thing to bring up, because it brings something to the table of what you are and who you are. I would say that a crafty way to ensure that it's relevant, if that's a particular hobby or interest, or you're an extension of your own being, is to say, I've brought up 2 beautiful, conscientious, intelligent daughters, and these are the ways in which that I've done that. Keep that to 10 seconds. Go into why you feel as though that you can bring that quality to the workplace and be a role model for other people within either colleagues or other members of corporate teams. It's just a slight pivot where you can extend it to where it is relevant for you to be a team player and really live up to the values of the organisation, because chances are the person who you're interviewing with has also got kids or has someone who has kids, and they know the challenges that will bring up 2 beautiful girls. If that helps.
I'm actually going to say a huge thank you to our panel, to Natalie, Zara, Barb and Donna for sharing your time, your insights and your experience. I'm sure that the people online have found it really invaluable and will be able to implement some of the tactics you've described. I note that we didn't get to all of the questions that were there in the Q&A. We will try, and I think Susan's busy answering a number of those as we speak. Thank you, Susan. But I hope that people have had their questions answered, and if not, I'm hoping that the answers that Susan's putting in there will do for you. There are still 5 webinars left in our Career Academy series, including a webinar later today on a career in defence law, and also tomorrow on opening doors as an international law student in Australia. So register to watch live, or you can also catch up on the recording on demand. I'm just, as we speak, going to post a link into the chat. And this is going to hopefully go to everyone. This is a survey, a link to a survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you have any ideas for future webinars, or you'd like to make comments on the survey that's just been. We'd really appreciate if you could fill in that survey there. Also, don't forget to connect with us and make sure you're aware of upcoming events and programs at the college. We have loads of articles and information that's posted nationally and shared with the profession on LinkedIn, and also on our events and resources pages on the College of Law website. I look forward to seeing you online again soon. Thank you so much to our panelists. Really appreciate you giving us your valuable insights. I know that I've learned a lot too. I'm hoping that the people watching have as well.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.